Hi guys, and welcome back. In this video, we will learn how to plan and answer 4 and 8 mark exam questions on weather hazards. We will go through the structure we need so that we can develop the confidence to answer them in a way that helps us to achieve those top level marks. This video is a follow-up to the Cyclone Aila and Hurricane Katrina case study videos. The videos had practice exam questions, which we will answer in this video. If you would like to watch the case study videos first, so as to get the information you need answering the questions in this video, please feel free to do so. There are links to the case study videos in the description below, and they are also available in the case study playlists. I will also be posting tectonic hazard case study videos, so ensure that you subscribe if you'd like to receive notification when they are uploaded. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so question A reads, explain 2 reasons that make Bangladesh vulnerable to tropical storms, and that is worth 4 marks. Now for this particular question, we will need to write down a first reason and then an explanation for that reason, and then after that we will need to write a second reason and an explanation for that second reason. Now sometimes we forget to write down the explanations, we just write down the reasons, and obviously if we write down reasons on their own, that is only half of the mark, so we lose 50% of the mark straight away. So make sure when answering 4 mark questions or explain questions that you write the reason that you've been asked to write and then an explanation for each of the reasons that you're writing down. Okay, so please pause the video and have a go at the question. We will look at the response on the next slide. Okay, so for the first question, I have decided to talk about relief and poverty as reasons why Bangladesh is vulnerable to tropical storms. So the answer reads as follows. One reason that Bangladesh is vulnerable to tropical cyclones is its relief. So up to there, where it says relief, we already have attained 1 mark or achieved 1 mark. The land in Bangladesh is low-lying and will be easily flooded by high amounts of rainfall from a tropical storm. Now that is the second mark, and that is because we have now explained why Bangladesh's relief can make it vulnerable to tropical storms. Okay, then we go on to poverty. So poverty is a second reason why Bangladesh is vulnerable. That's an additional 1 mark. Now we don't need to write the entire sentence if we don't want to. We can always say poverty is a second reason. That will also qualify as the 3rd mark. This means that they lack the money and resources to prepare adequately for tropical storms. So that then is the 4th mark there. And again, we have explained poverty as a reason why Bangladesh is vulnerable to tropical storms. So very easily there, we have already pocketed 4 marks out of the potential 94 marks that we need. Okay, 90 marks to go. Let's carry on. Okay, so the second question reads, explain 1 social and 1 economic impact of cyclones. And again, this question is also 4 marks. Now, when talking about social impacts, we are referring to those impacts that have to do with people, and then the economic ones have to do with money. So to answer the question here, I have said that 1 social impact is homelessness. So by giving that first reason there, we have already given ourselves 1 mark. Strong winds from tropical storms can destroy people's homes and leave them with nowhere to live. Now that again is a 2nd mark now because we have explained that reason of homelessness. Okay, so the destruction of homes leading to people being homeless, and the destruction of homes has been caused by the tropical storm. Then the 2nd reason rather, is destruction of infrastructure. So the destruction of infrastructure is an economic impact of cyclones. So the 3rd mark. The infrastructure will need to be rebuilt at a high cost, having an impact on a country's GDP. So we have linked infrastructure to cost or money, and therefore we now deserve that additional mark. So again, in total, we have 4 marks for that question. Okay, so on to the 8-mark question. Evaluate the view that storm surges are the most devastating hazard of tropical cyclones. So I have decided to look at the assessment objectives here before we get to answering the actual question. So the assessment objectives in the hazards 8-mark questions are AO2 and AO3. Now AO2, if we begin with that, requires you to go beyond simply remembering facts. So if you're remembering facts, that is AO1. So you're basically recalling what you have learned, and that would be AO1. But AO2 requires you to apply that knowledge to understand and to explain geographical concepts, ideas, and their connections. So if we are talking about this particular question, this particular 8-marker, it simply means applying your knowledge of cyclones and the hazards they cause to their impacts in different contexts you have studied them at. And the different contexts we are talking about here are LIC context, so low income country context, our example here being Cyclone Aila, and then HIC context, which is high income country context, and that would be Hurricane Katrina. Now it would be good for us to make comparisons between the two, and then eventually come to a judgment, which will be AO3, but we'll get to that in a second. Now it will also be important to categorize the impacts under social, economic, and environmental where possible. So very simply put, AO2 requires that you demonstrate understanding. So understanding of the knowledge that you have of tropical cyclones. And for AO2, you get 4 out of the 8 marks that are allocated to the 8-mark question. So the other 4 marks are for AO3. That is what the examiner is going to credit, AO3. And this is where you apply knowledge and understanding to interpret. So the first 2 were AO1, which was knowledge, AO2, understanding. So you apply those 2 to interpret, analyze, and evaluate geographical information and issues, and to make judgments. Now, this simply means to rank and weigh up the information and make a judgment or a decision. So the information you will have written down and the issues, you will need to weigh those up and then come to a judgment. When you do that effectively, you then get those 4 marks for AO3. We will please do not worry about some of this terminology, and if this particular part seems a little difficult, do not worry, because as we get into the video it will become a lot more apparent, and as we go along I will explain the AO2 and the AO3 in the answer so that it becomes a lot clearer. So let's go to the answer, and it should clarify things as we go along. So there are 4 things that are important to do and to remember for 8-mark questions. And the first one is to identify the command and keywords in the question and what we are expected to do based on those command words. And then secondly, we would need to write a plan of what it is that we want to talk about in each of the paragraphs that we intend to write. Then for each of the paragraphs, we need to use a PEAL structure for our answer. So PEAL being point, explanation, evidence, and link. And then the fourth thing to remember is to write a conclusion right at the end. Okay, so if we begin with identification of the command and keywords in the question, we can then see here that the first command word here is to evaluate. And to evaluate refers to ranking information or weighing up information and making a judgment. So coming to a judgment as to which of those pieces of information is most important, which one is not as important, and which one is the least important. Then the next thing here that I have highlighted is storm surges. Now, a storm surge is a hazard of tropical cyclones, okay? And when talking about hazards of tropical cyclones, our specification requires us to know 4 of them. So the first one is storm surges, and then the other ones here are strong winds, that's the second one, heavy rainfall, and landslides. Okay, now the reason why I have highlighted landslides here is because the Edexcel B specification requires us to know those 4 main hazards, but landslides are not recorded as having affected Bangladesh during Cyclone Aila. So it's worth noting, however, that during Cyclone Aila, landslides did happen, but not in Bangladesh. They occurred in neighboring India and were primarily triggered by heavy rainfall and storm surges, which then destabilized the steep slopes in the area and led to mudslides. And there's a district in India called Darjeeling district in West Bengal, where those landslides actually killed at least 22 people and damaged or destroyed hundreds of homes. Okay, so we are evaluating, we are ranking and weighing up, and what we are ranking and weighing up is those hazards of tropical cyclones, the hazards being tropical storms, strong winds, and heavy rainfall. So the plan here, as you can see, the way I have laid it out is in paragraphs. So for the first paragraph, I intend to talk about storm surges. Second paragraph, strong winds. Third paragraph, heavy rainfall. And then finally, make a conclusion where I make a definitive judgment so that I can ensure that I have also bagged the 4 marks for the AO3. Okay, so on to our first paragraph. So in our plan, we had said that in paragraph 1, we'll be talking about storm surges. So let's begin. A storm surge is a rise in sea level caused by tropical cyclones. They are one of several hazards caused by tropical cyclones and can have a devastating effect on coastal areas. So what have I done up to now? So I have defined what a storm surge is, and I have also made the examiner aware that I know that storm surges are only one of several hazards that are caused by tropical cyclones. Okay, so this is because they bring an excess amount of water to the coast, leading to flooding. So now there I have made my point now, because I have linked storm surges to an impact that is happening along coastlines where they affect. Okay, so that's the point there. And then for the explanation now, the sudden gush of flood water can lead to socio-economic impacts such as loss of life, injury, destruction of homes, buildings, and infrastructure. So I have now explained the point. Now the point was that there's an excess amount of water brought to the coast by the storm surge, and now I am explaining that that excess amount of water can impact the coastline in several ways. And again, I'm making the examiner aware that I am knowledgeable in terms of knowing the impacts of a hazard like a cyclone can be categorized under social, economic, and environmental. But in this particular case, I've only talked about social and economic. So the example that I gave here was destruction of homes. So that can be both social and economic, because if homes are destroyed, people will be homeless. That's a social impact. And then those homes will need to be rebuilt, or those people will need to be rehoused. So that is an economic impact. Okay, so that's the explanation to the point. Okay, let's carry on. So an example, so now we are on to the example. An example of this is the 7-meter storm surge that devastated New Orleans, causing extensive flooding in the 9th ward during Hurricane Katrina. The storm surge overwhelmed the levees, causing them to collapse, leaving 80% of New Orleans submerged for weeks. So now I have given an example of a HIC, which is the USA Hurricane Katrina, and I've also explained how the storm surge led to flooding of New Orleans. Okay, so that there is my evidence. Then now on to the link. However, it could be argued that the water collected or accumulated behind the levees initially before they broke, leading to an even greater gush of water and greater devastation. So what am I doing here? I'm weighing up the point that I have just given up here. So the point was, from the evidence, that it was a storm surge that caused the levees to collapse and caused flooding in New Orleans. But then I'm also counter-arguing that and saying that somebody else could argue that it was because the water built up or accumulated first behind the levee that we had such devastation, such that the gush of water was caused more by the accumulation first before the levees broke. So it's not just, some people may argue that it's not just the storm surge, but it's also the fact that the levees failed. So that is a form of assessment or link that I am making here, and that is a form of AO3. So even in the first paragraph, I'm beginning to demonstrate some kind of AO3 to the examiner so that he can begin to credit me some of the 4 marks that have been allocated for that AO3. But as far as this first part is concerned, I have demonstrated my understanding, so that there is good evidence for AO2. Okay, let's go on to the next paragraph. Okay, so on to the second paragraph. Now, according to the plan that we had made at the beginning, we were to talk about strong winds in the second paragraph. So that's what we are going to do. But before we do that, I'd like us to go through the question so that we can clarify a couple of points. So evaluate the view that storm surges are the most devastating hazard of tropical cyclones. So are storm surges the most devastating hazard of tropical cyclones, or is there something else? So for us to determine that, then we have to compare those storm surges to something else. And that something else, in this case, in the second paragraph, is the strong winds. Okay, so the point goes as follows. Strong winds are another hazard caused by tropical cyclones. So we've made our point there. So then to the explanation, winds caused by tropical cyclones usually travel at speeds over 120 kilometers an hour. Such strong winds can cause economic impacts such as knocking down power lines and structural damage to buildings. Trees can also be uprooted, leading to environmental impact. So we have explained how strong winds can have an impact on areas that they affect. And we have also demonstrated that we are aware of economic impacts such as knocking down power lines and structural damage, and also aware of environmental impacts, which is where the trees were uprooted by those strong winds. Okay, then moving on to an example. So our example here is that, so an example of this is the 360 km/h winds that devastated Bangladesh during Cyclone Aila. Being a poor country, houses and buildings were poorly built and could not withstand such strong winds. 750,000 people were left homeless, causing a huge social impact. So we have given an example, this time of an LIC, so low income country, which is Bangladesh, and that is for Cyclone Aila. And we've said that the housing there was poorly built and could not withstand the winds, and therefore was damaged or destroyed, leading to a social impact where 750,000 people were left homeless. So now we have social, we have economic up here, and we have environmental impacts, all included in our 8 marker. Now let's go on now to the link. Now this one here is a little longer because I needed to make a point here, and I'm going to explain it, but you don't necessarily need to write a very long link here, but let's just go to, talk through it. So in my opinion, so now you're beginning to make some kind of judgment and some comparisons, and you are also weighing up strong winds against storm surges. Okay, so this is what you need to demonstrate to the examiner that you can do. So in my opinion, I think that strong winds are more important than storm surges. This is because the main cause of a storm surge is high winds pushing the seawater towards the coast. So what are we saying then? What we are trying to show here is that strong winds are a little more important than storm surges. And that's because storm surges are actually, they're not storm surges, but strong winds are actually what lead to storm surges. So it's a case of, almost a case of, you know, what came before the other. Is it the chicken or the egg, and so on, right? So in this case, we are saying it's a strong winds that cause the storm surge. Okay, so that's an argument we're making there. Okay, let's carry on. So where did we stop? Furthermore, strong winds also tend to have more devastating effects on LICs where building and infrastructure is not reinforced due to lack of funds and resources to invest in cyclone-prone areas. So we are going on to further explain why we think that strong winds are a little more important than the storm surges. Okay. However, strong points. Now then we counter argue ourselves, right? So we've made these points, but we also want to give the opinion of somebody else who may be on the other side of the argument. By doing this, we are doing a very effective job of AO3 because we are weighing up and we are ranking, okay, and we are showing the process towards the decision that we are going to make at the end, right? So this is really important, and that's why I included a portion here that was slightly longer than one would ordinarily write to get the full 8 marks. So however, strong winds such as the 200 km/h winds during Hurricane Katrina can still damage other infrastructure such as communication infrastructure and power lines in HICs. So what are we saying? We are saying that, okay, fine, they do cause a lot more, the winds, they do cause a lot more devastation in poorer countries where the infrastructure is not that strong. However, in HICs where the infrastructure is a little stronger, if you get winds that are strong enough, they can still cause damage to infrastructure. Okay, so these are arguments that we are making and weighing up that we are doing in the process towards making that final judgment in the final paragraph that we are going to write at the end of this 8-mark question. Okay. Okay, so on to the 3rd paragraph. And in our plan that we had laid out at the start of the 8-marker, we had decided that we would talk about heavy rainfall in the 3rd paragraph, and that is what we are going to do, and that is for the purposes of comparing storm surges to heavy rainfall and to what we talked about in the previous slide, which was strong winds. So the point starts as follows. Heavy rainfall is another hazard caused by tropical cyclones. That's your point. We've made our point there. Heavy rainfall can lead to flooding, causing damage to property and infrastructure. So we have explained how heavy rainfall can lead to impacts along coastlines or the areas where they affect. During Cyclone Aila, Bangladesh received over 120 millimeters of rainfall within just a few hours. Considering that 80% of Bangladesh is only 10 meters above sea level and that it's at the confluence of 3 rivers, the water was too much for the rivers to drain away quickly enough, causing it to reach 4 meters in some areas. One of the significant environmental impacts of this was that 30 Bengal tigers drowned. These are an endangered species. Now you will have noticed that we did not talk too much about the classification of impacts under economic, social, and environmental. We only mentioned environmental in the 3rd paragraph because we had already done a very good job of talking about or classifying those impacts in the 2nd paragraph. Okay, so on to the link. Heavy rainfall and storm surges have similar impacts on coastal areas as both lead to flooding. However, storm surges arrive at the coast with a lot more force and speed, leading to greater damage. So what have we done then? We have compared storm surges to heavy rainfall and the impact that both of those bring along coastlines, so as to determine which one we think is a lot more of a devastating hazard of tropical cyclones. And we are saying that we think it's storm surges because those storm surges arrive at the coast with a lot more speed and force. So they are likely to create or to cause a lot more damage than would the rainwater, the rainfall that causes an increase in the height of water in the areas that have been affected. So they are not, the rainfall is not causing the water to move at high speeds as the storm surge actually is, and therefore we think that storm surges are likely to cause a lot more damage than just the heavy rainfall. Okay, so on to the conclusion. So on to the conclusion then, and it's in the conclusion where we are going to make a judgment. So overall, it could be argued that strong winds are one of the most devastating hazards of tropical cyclones. So we have not necessarily said that it's the most devastating. We've just said it's one of the most. It is the strong winds that cause storm surges in the first place. Heavy rainfall leads to flooding. Okay, so we've talked about strong winds. We've said that they are likely to be the most devastating out of the 3. And then we've also talked about storm surges being caused by those strong winds. So they come second. And then we are talking now about heavy rainfall, which sort of comes third to storm surges. So heavy rainfall leads to flooding, just like in the case of storm surges. However, the worst devastation caused by tropical cyclones cannot be put down to just one of the hazards that I have discussed. Okay, so instead it's a combination of all 3 hazards, as they all have a role to play in causing devastating impacts in the places that experience them. Okay, so in the judgment that we are making here, we are saying it's actually a combination of those 3 hazards that are caused by tropical storms that eventually lead to the kind of a devastation that we see in the areas that they affect. Okay, and then I've put something additional here and said that the wealth of a country also has a role to play in the amount of devastation that an area will experience. And we are throwing that in there because we are wanting to show that HICs versus LICs will make a difference also in how devastating a hazard is likely to be, how devastating the hazards are likely to be as a result of those tropical cyclones, because things such as the strength of buildings and infrastructure, things such as prediction and preparation are also likely to have a role to play in the amount of devastation that is likely to take place. That brings us to the end of this video on how to answer 4 and 8 mark exam questions on weather hazards. I hope that you have found it useful. I have also done the volcano case studies for Mount Nyiragongo in the DRC, which is an LIC, and Mount Sakurajima in Japan, which is a HIC. These two videos also have exam questions which will be answered in a separate video for practice purposes. You can find these videos in the case study playlist or on the suggested videos that will pop up on this particular slide. I'm also currently working on the earthquake case studies and will be uploading their videos shortly. Ensure that you are subscribed if you'd like to be notified when they are uploaded. Also, please do not hesitate to send me any questions or case study video suggestions in the comment section below. All the best and see you again soon.